There is no Tsukihime anime. This is a phrase you've likely heard if you're a typemoon fan. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. There is, in fact, a Tsukihime anime from 2003 produced by JC Staff. Look, I've got a copy right here. The anime adaptation has been universally rejected by fans, and in an effort to stop people from watching it, acknowledging it, and as a joke, people will say, there is no Tsukihime anime anytime it's referenced or questioned in any capacity. The obvious question is then, is the Tsukihime anime really that bad? Does it deserve the reputation it has earned? Is Tsukihime Lunar Legend better left forgotten? To talk about the adaptation, we must first look at its source material. Tsukihime is a Japanese visual novel written by Konoko Nasu with art by Takeshi Takeuchi. The narrative is presented in a text format like a novel, but is accompanied by music, character sprites, backgrounds, and special art for certain scenes to enhance the gameplay experience. The story follows Shiki Tono, a young teenager that was exiled from his affluent family due to an accident 8 years prior. However, this accident gave him more than a couple of scars. He gained the ability to see mysterious lines that walk the line between life and death. After his father's death at the beginning of the story, he is called back into his family by his sister, and from that point forward, the path he takes is up to the player. There are 5 possible directions the story can take, each revolving around one of the 5 main heroines. To see Tsukihime to completion, you're looking at about 40 hours of story across all 5 routes. In my opinion, Tsukihime is worth the time investment and is one of the best visual novels around, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that 40 hours isn't a huge time sink for most, especially considering the lack of production value. Tsukihime was typemoon's first visual novel, so it's nowhere near as refined as what would come after it. There's no voice acting, the CGs are basic and few and far between, the backgrounds are simple photos with filters over it, and not all of the routes have the same amount of content. Despite these problems, Tsukihime still delivers an interesting story with layered characters, memorable music, and excellent world building. It's an experience that is uniquely typemoon, but has room for improvement. That's why I don't think an anime adaptation is a bad idea on paper. Obviously, some concessions need to be made. Pieces of media adapted from one medium to another are rarely one-to-one. As a result, Tsukihime Lunar Legend chooses to adapt Arcoade's route over the span of 12 episodes. Each episode is around 20 minutes, giving it a rough runtime of 4.5 hours. That's more than enough time to condense Arcoade's story and make it digestible, but there is one problem. Arcoade's route doesn't give you all of the answers. A big aspect of the story is the mystery behind the accident Shiki was in 8 years ago. Now, the answer is revealed to you in Arcoade's route. Akiha, Shiki's sister, plays a big part in it. If you were to stop at Arcoade's route, you're not going to understand absolutely everything, but that's okay. The other routes can expand upon things that weren't the focus in Arcoade's story. The anime doesn't have this luxury, so halfway through the show, it starts grafting parts of Akiha's story into Arcoade's. They try their best incorporating this into Arcoade's route by creating an entirely original scenario where the cast go off to an amusement park. The addition effectively derails the progression of the story and drastically changes how the main villain is portrayed. I have a sneaking suspicion that they went about doing this to meet the 12-episode runtime, and probably feared the audience would lose interest due to Tsukihime's slow by design pacing. Speaking of pacing, the pacing of the show is all over the place. In its first episode alone, it combines multiple chapters of the visual novel into one episode. This isn't actually a bad idea. You need a good hook to keep people interested, so moving one of the most interesting parts of the story to the end of the first episode could work, but it needs to be done right. Unfortunately, they completely and utterly drop the ball. Shiki has to leave class early because he's suffering from anemia, a side effect of his accident 8 years ago. As he's walking home, he sees her, a woman in white with golden hair. In the visual novel, the sight alone drives him mad. Shiki then starts following her, justifying why in his head, but as he continues to follow, his thoughts get more and more erratic, and eventually he just starts actively stalking this woman. He methodically follows her home, waits for her to go up to her apartment, then rings her doorbell, and before she can even react, he kills her in an instant, cutting her into 17 pieces. This is one of Tsukihime's most important scenes. It turns everything you thought the story would be on its head, and from that point forward, you don't know what to expect. The anime removes all of the nuance from this scene. Shiki no longer stalks Arcuade, and without his inner monologue, it seems like he kills her for basically no reason. Like it was a spur of the moment thing. He just saw her at the park and he went for it. The most insulting aspect of this whole thing is that Arcuade, the strongest character in the story, runs away from this random high school kid with a knife when she can easily turn him into paste with the flick of a wrist. It also doesn't help that he does this in broad daylight, making my suspension of disbelief drop out the window, but at this point I'm nitpicking. The one compliment I can give is that the scene is animated very well. Everything that made this scene interesting in the visual novel is gone, and what we're left with is something that is surface level and watered down. Unfortunately, a lot of key scenes suffer from this issue, and it's frustrating. With that pacing derailing tangent out of the way, let's get back to the pacing of the show. The show continues with its fast pace, encountering and defeating the dead apostle Nero Chaos. Things then slow down to a crawl. Tsukihime and other typemoon visual novels are known for their slow burn. You get to spend a lot of time with the characters and learn more about the world. Lunar Legend tries to emulate this, but it spreads itself too thin, dividing focus between Shiki's classmates, CL, Akiha, and Arcuade, despite this being her story. As a result, the time spent with her doesn't feel as impactful as it should. I wouldn't be surprised if a first-time viewer got bored quickly because it's just so all over the place. What substance remains from the visual novel is surface level at best. Important concepts get a passing mention or one-sentence explanations. Obviously, we can't do info dumps like the visual novel could given the limited runtime, but by glossing over things, it makes the story and characters feel shallow, and the characterization doesn't help. The characterization in Lunar Legend is poor. It gets the characters wrong to varying degrees. Akiha, Hisui, and Kohaku are mostly unchanged. Arcuade is much more aloof, like a princess, but some of her more human traits, like her tendency to be an airhead and her curiosity about the human world, have been toned down. Due to the lack of internal dialogue, Shiki comes off as one-dimensional. He never really comes into his own, and outside of attacking Arcuade at the beginning of the story, you don't really get to see the other sides of his personality. His resolve and determination rarely shine through. With Arcuade and Shiki being much weaker characters, the relationship between the two, which serves as the story's emotional core, doesn't hit as hard. However, the most egregious example of mischaracterization is CL. CL is supposed to be a good friend, trying her best to steer Shiki in what she thinks is the right direction. Above that, she is a covert agent for the Holy Church, trying to track down Roa, a vampire that reincarnates by possessing his host's body. Lunar Legend throws this out the window by having her blatantly attack Shiki out in the open within the first couple of episodes. It's not like she does something clever to test if Shiki is being possessed by Roa. She just goes full Wolverine mode and attacks the guy. When questioned about this by Shiki, who obviously remembers getting attacked the previous night, she vehemently denies it, and he just rolls with it and continues to trust her, never thinking to question her again. You would assume the biggest advantage Lunar Legend has over its visual novel counterpart would be its animation. However, the animation in Lunar Legend leaves a lot to be desired. Animation is reused constantly, likely to save on budget. For example, this clip of Ciel jumping into the moon is reused 2 to 4 times. Really, her role in this show is to stand on light posts, say something cryptic, and then jump into the moon. Any scene at the school has a bad habit of reusing animation as well. When things are animated, it looks great, but when it comes to fight scenes, they're more often than not toned down, likely, again, in a bid to save on budget and to avoid showing excess blood and gore. For its score, Lunar Legend uses a lot of violin and piano. It's nice at first, but there isn't enough variety. I honestly could not tell if they were reusing the same couple of tracks over and over, or it just sounded similar. None of the tracks found in the visual novel are present or even remixed, which is such a huge misstep. Tsukihime's soundtrack is distinct. It can go from calm and relaxing to tense and scary, to horrific and unsettling, to ethereal and melancholic. It's a core part of its identity, and the anime original soundtrack doesn't hold a candle to it. It just fails to stand out, or even replicate the tone that the original music was going for. I understand why they opted for an original soundtrack, considering it is an adaptation. They want it to stand on its own. But not even bothering to use the amazing main theme at any point was a bad call. It would have been such an easy slam dunk. Above all else, Lunar Legend's greatest issue is that it's lost almost all of what made it unique. Nasu, Tsukihime's writer, has an unmistakable writing style. He writes characters in a specific way, builds the worlds those characters inhabit meticulously, and puts a lot of thought behind the world's conceptual building blocks. Due to the limited runtime, the anime has to focus on the characters and narrative, which is understandable, but in its mainstream focus, it loses a lot of the Nasuisms typemoon is known for. Add on to the aforementioned unremarkable soundtrack, questionable pacing, dodgy characterization, and less than impressive animation, and you have an adaptation that lacks identity. In this final section of the video, I'm going to complain about specific things Tsukihime Lunar Legend gets wrong, that I feel I need to go into more detail about. As a result, I will be going into heavy spoilers for the anime, the visual novel, and possibly the remake of the visual novel. If you'd like to avoid spoilers, please use this timestamp. When I watched this show for the first time, the number one thing I was looking forward to was seeing Nero Chaos come to life. He's only in the visual novel for a short time, but in that time he leaves a strong impression. From his dreamlike introduction to his brutal attack on the hotel, all capped off with his epic showdown with Arcuate and Shiki. You can imagine my disappointment when Lunar Legend turned him into a generic villain that only attacks using wolves and tummy teeth. I can imagine any animator would have a field day with Nero given his ability to summon any animal, but Lunar Legend just refuses to capitalize on this. None of his scenes carry the same weight. He no longer has this inhuman, threatening presence. Now he's just some guy. It's no longer a battle against insurmountable odds. Nero isn't pushed to his limit as Shiki fights for his life, slicing anything and everything that's sent his way. Instead, Shiki shows the slightest amount of resistance, and that gets Nero really mad, causing him to jump at Shiki, which is what gets him killed. On my original viewing, I dropped Lunar Legend at the hotel scene, but if I had stayed to see the fight, I don't think I'd be making this video today. Michael Roa, main villain of Tsukihime, is a character that doesn't exist in Lunar Legend. Shiki never gets his revenge, so Roa never gets to take full control of his body. A handful of times, Roa will speak separately from Shiki as they share the same body, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're doing Arcuade's story, it has to be Roa in the end. I'm guessing in an attempt to make the fight personal for Arc and Shiki, they did the shared body thing, so it's Shiki versus Shiki and Roa versus Arc. But that's unnecessary, because the fight between Roa and Shiki was already personal. If we ignore the fact that Roa kills the woman Shiki loves right in front of him, Shiki and Roa are both people who have faced death. One rejects it and chooses to selfishly reincarnate in a bid to live forever. The other accepts death. Shiki won't have much time in this world due to his mystic eyes, but he still lives life to its fullest, as we see in Tsukihime's epilogue. That's why, even though Roa is able to use Shiki's mystic eyes against him, he can only see the lines and not the big picture. In accepting death, Shiki is able to kill the man who refuses to die. Instead of doing any of this, we have a 1v1 knife fight with Shiki. With no Roa at the final battle, we don't get to see any of his unique powers either. Arcuade still tries to use her trump card in a last-ditch effort to win, but they cut away from Shiki getting obliterated, missing out on another animation opportunity. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big Shiki fan, and I hope the remake does him justice, but he has a time and a place, and that's on the far side, not in Arcuade's story. Those were just some of the major things that annoyed me, but there are a couple of minor things as well. Shiki's knife is no longer inscribed with 7 knights, aka Nania. It really makes no sense why this was changed. Yes, it's a small detail, but it's the only connection Shiki has to his real family. Also, he gets the knife when his clan is killed instead of Makihisa Tono holding onto it out of guilt. Just another example of interesting characterization going out the window. When Shiki meets up with Arc after killing her, she says, "Found you," but the meeting is entirely incidental. If he chose not to return to the park on his way to school, she wouldn't have found anything. Again, in the visual novel, Arcuade retraces her steps and waits for Shiki to come to her, and then chases him down. In Lunar Legend, she lets him get away and lets him go to school, just so we can get Satsuki's backstory, who gets to stay alive instead of dying. I have no problem with that, but I swear, they only kept her around to suffer. They even have her confess at the end of the show, and it doesn't go well, but hey, it's better than being eaten or turned into a vampire. When I set out to make this video, I was expecting to find some grand answer as to why Lunar Legend misses the mark. After watching it in full multiple times, I couldn't find that answer. It's too generic and boring for the general anime audience, while at the same time is a surface level adaptation and delivers on nothing that makes the visual novel an all-time classic, alienating hardcore typemoon fans. JC's staff didn't get what makes Tsukihime special, and it shows. That need for finding the answer never really left my brain, and during the editing of this video, I came to a shockingly simple revelation, and it was staring me in the face the whole time. Instead of being some complex, intricate answer, the answer is as simple as it could get. Tsukihime Lunar Legend is just another case where the book is better than the movie. And thus, we've reached the end of typemoon June yet again. I want to thank everyone once again for watching, commenting, liking. You guys are what makes typemoon June truly special. Just because this is the last episode of typemoon June doesn't mean that it's over yet. Next time, we'll be wrapping up Type Moon June in the annual Type Moon June wrap-up video, where I'm going to cover some things that I missed during Type Moon June and give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek at how I do things on Type Moon June. Until that time comes, thanks for watching, and no matter the month, whether it be June or not, have a happy Type Moon June.